Alright, we got the cam gear out and the oil pump gear out. What I did was I used a counterbalance or a harmonic balancer puller to pull the flywheel. We had to use a shorter bolt to push it out with to be able to do it without taking a gas tank out. Got that out, got the flywheel key off, got the outer starter gear off. I dropped one of the springs, I'll put it back on. And then went ahead and took oil pump gear off, counterbalance gear off, which it's got a 1 1/4 inch nut for the counterbalance gear with a lock washer, and then a snap ring. There's a snap ring for the oil pump gear, so we got those taken off. Then I went ahead and unbolted the guide for the time chain. Got the cam chain guide unbolted, pulled out. I was able to sneak, or then we took the bolts out for our cam gear with the advanced weights, and I was able to drop the cam chain down and sneak it around the inner guide there. So we were able to get that pulled out without having to take the head off or anything silly like that. So now we're just going to go ahead and start in reverse order, putting the cam chain gear snuck around the bottom of that guide and run it up with a piece of wire to the head, and we will get that attached and I will come back. Alright, so I snuck that cam chain around between the guide and the little gear with the springs on it, starter gear, and I got us a wire, ran from the top down, and we'll just sneak that right on up there. Shebang. Let that hang like that. Okay. And we're going to make sure that we're on at the bottom with our teeth. And then I'm going to put the cam guide back up in there. We're going to slide the cam guide back in. But you just take it sideways like this. Sneaking back up in there like that. And turn it. And then we will bolt it back up. Our bolts like that, and then we'll get our cam gear on. Okay, we've got the chain and the guides back in, and we got our cam gear back in. And I'm going to show you, I've got it lined up. There's our tang up there on the case. Anyway, right here in the center of my screen is the tang. There's our timing mark. That dot there, and it's lined up with the tang, and then our keyway is lined up with that mark there. So that tells us our top and bottom are in time. So now I've just got to get our gears back on and make sure they are all in time. Oh yeah, we've got these, the flyweight, cam advance flyweights right here. These are the covers. We've got to put them back on. So also one more thing about these, I'm gonna put a little dab of Loctite, blue Loctite on here, because I've had them come apart on a Raptor that we put back together once, and you don't want that to happen, folks. So a little dab of blue, not a whole lot. Okay, now we got our cam bolts in there with the fly out covers, cam advance fly out weight covers bolted on. Now we've got our little starter gear with the springs back on. This is the timing mark. It lines up with your flywheel key weight keyway. This is the little retaining ring, and then a snap ring goes on the outer edge of that. So we'll get that put on. Okay, we got that done. Snap ring's on. Now we're going to put on the oil pump gear and counterbalance gear. We're going to do it at the same time so that they can slide onto the dowels together, and that keyway lines up there, and we'll have the mark on the counterbalance will line up with the mark on our starter gear on the crank. Okay, this is going to show you how I'm going to do that. I'm going to put the timing, or the oil pump chain on the gear. Then we'll hang the oil pump gear from the bottom and just slide it all on at one time, same assembly. Okay, now I've got it slid on. I'm leaving the top counterbalance gear partially not seated so I can roll the crank and the counterbalance around together to make sure we line up mark to mark and everything's timed correctly. Alright, here we go. Now we've got counterbalance and crank are in sync, and we should have our time gear, our crank and our cam should be in sync. Alright, so we got the snap ring on our oil pump gear, or the counterbalance retaining clip, and the nuts on. And here's a little tip for you for holding this while you're tightening down that nut, because it's going to want to spin the counterbalance and spin the motor because they're all geared together and you ain't got nothing to hold on to at this point. Take your penny, because it's a soft metal penny. Don't use anything else, use a penny. You take that penny, you stick it inside that gear right there, and it will hold just enough where you can get cranked down and tightened up, and then you can take and back it off just a hair. Bring that penny out. See, it'll jerk up the penny a little, but it won't mess up the gears, and it'll hold plenty good enough where you can get that. So now all you gotta do is take and bend. That one was the one that was bent. I'm gonna bend this side, have this side bent down for your retaining clip. After we get that done, we can go through putting our starting gears on and a flywheel back on with that starting gear. Okay, so we've got our little washer here. Doesn't look like it's concaved or anything, so we're gonna slap our little washer back on. Take our starting gear. No timing on it. We'll get him put back on. Okay. Then we'll take our needle bearings, slide them back on that tang. Get our starting gear for the fly out. Looks like, yep, we gotta put it on first before we put this one on. So, slide him back on. Slide that gear on. Okay, so that's back together, right? Now we're going to get flywheel key put back on. This is magnetic, your flywheel is, so I always just take and I'll stick that flywheel key up in there so you don't lose it. Okay, so they don't always like to go in just all great, so So what I like to do is I get that one side started, and I'll get me a hammer and a punch, and I'll use a punch on this other side here. So start tapping it in, and it'll slide in the way you want it to go. So we just tapped that right in there and got it even. That's the same way of taking it out. If you ever have one that don't quite want to come out, just take you a tap, or take you a punch and a hammer, and just start tapping on one side, and it'll roll up out, and you can get a hold of it with a pair of pliers and wiggle it out. Okay, now we got our flywheel, and you want to check, make sure your roller bearings in here, or your bearings for your starter gear, are all good. Make sure nothing's hanging up. Everything looks like it should be in order. And then you've got slot, slides over the top of your keyway there. And we're going to slide him back on, and we are going to get him torqued back down to spec, and we should be able to just go ahead and get the, we're going to put our cam chain tensioner in, and it's a ratcheting mechanism, so you're going to want to push it all the way in. You want to push in this, and then push the ratcheting mechanism all the way in as far as you can get it, and then you'll bolt it in, and then you'll take and put the spring and the bolt for that spring in, and then that way it'll tighten up your cam chain, and everything will become nice and tight.